Hello my friends, my name is Artur Rehi and I am an Estonian YouTuber. Today's video is about a certain American battle that everybody knows in US, but not many know outside of US. And if you're from Europe or some other part of the world, this video is going to be as educative for you as it is for me. We're gonna watch history buffs Gettysburg. And everybody knows Gettysburg in American soil, I'm pretty sure about that. It's like your one true battle, Americans versus Americans. Everybody died, but it was victorious for the North. I wanna know what really happened. Before we start, this channel has a new sponsor. Yes, at least for a while. And guess what it is? It's fish. I'm not kidding you. Fish. Breeze. Breeze is an Estonian company. Breeze, like breeze in English, means wind, earth wind or sea wind. Why I like this company? They actually produce kilu. Kilu is almost an Estonian national fish. These both are kilu. I love kilu. I've made many videos about it.
You need fat to survive in the winter. It's like Siberia, so zip it and take the oil. First food we're gonna talk about is in Estonian, it's kiluvõileib sibulaga. It's almost Estonian national food.
You can watch links in the description below. You eat kilu raw, you put it on your bread with some butter and it's so yummy.
This is raw fish on a bread. The true Estonian snack. Very salty, very creamy, very good.
Why I like Breeze is because they recycle their plastic, they use only raw fresh fish, they are full out Estonian and everything they catch is from Baltic Sea, so pretty much all out Estonian company. Love the taste of it, it's super healthy. I suggest when you come to Estonia, buy Breeze. You can get the taste of Estonian, Eastern European, Nordic culture. As weird as it is me plugging this fish, I can vouch for it, so you don't have to worry. It tastes good. We have talked enough about fish. Let's jump into Gettysburg.
True American classic, Gettysburg. In vivid detail, this 4-hour epic covers the bloodiest battle that has ever been fought on American soil. The Battle of Gettysburg.
The bloodiest battle, yes, that's what I want, blood. And America.
Set in July of 1863, this is the story of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's bold plan to invade the North and provoke the Army of the Potomac into open battle. If successful, it could potentially turn...
I sometimes forget how not long ago US fought the Civil War. It's almost 1900s actually, and they just finished the Civil War. One generation ago they finished the Civil War and it's modernized era. You know, I have a very different idea of America than America really is, so yeah, I guess you know that already.
And the tide of America's Civil War in favor of the Confederacy. And that's the basic premise of the movie. Now as for its execution, let's just say that this is America's answer to Waterloo. Everyone involved in production gave it their all, from shooting on the real locations to recruiting thousands of Civil War reenactors to help bring this battle to life. This is another example of a historic film done right.
Recruiting thousands? Damn, this movie must have been expensive.
This is Gettysburg. By 1863, the American Civil War was at a stalemate, and 2 years of endless fighting had claimed 200,000 lives. At the turn of summer, the fate of the Confederacy had reached a critical point. In the Western Theater, Union armies led by Ulysses S. Grant were besieging the city of Vicksburg, a vital Confederate stronghold and supply route. Its capture would strategically place all of the Mississippi River into federal hands, effectively cutting the Confederacy in half. To the east, Confederate General Robert E. Lee devised...
Robert Lee, he was very famous, everybody knows him. I've heard his name many times, never knew what he really was, but he's a general now I find out. And he was a very respected one also.
It's a plan that he hopes will end the war before Vicksburg's fate is sealed.
Wait, these ships. I saw a movie about the Civil War and they used like full metal ships. I always had an idea that Civil War is this old-time war where you don't have modernized technology, but they did have iron ships, which was, I think, super new back then.
Across the Potomac with 75,000 men and pushed on until Pennsylvania to raid multiple Union supply depots. This move would provoke the Army of the Potomac into open battle. And if Lee was able to crush this northern army of 95,000 men, then nothing would stand between him and a defenseless Washington, where Lee hopes the peace movement and public outcry would force Lincoln into signing an armistice and recognize Southern independence. Morale amongst the Confederate troops was high, as Lee was often victorious in the field. even when outnumbered and against overwhelming odds. But most of these battles had been fought in the south, their success often hinging on knowledge of the local terrain and intelligence obtained by spies and civilians. But now Lee's army was marching into enemy territory with little of these advantages. General Stuart and 3 brigades of his cavalry that were
Everybody has these long bushy beards. I should get me one of those to be more like these men.
meant to act as the eyes and ears of the army disappeared for nearly 2 weeks without contact, leaving Lee effectively blind and forced to predict enemy movement from what little intelligence he had.
There would be some word from General Stuart. General Stuart would not leave us blind.
Oh, one other thing. Hooker's been replaced. George Meade's the new commander. Harrison read it in the Yankee papers.
George Meade, Pennsylvania man. Meade would be cautious, I think. Take him some time to get organized. Perhaps we should move more swiftly.
The man they're talking about was George Meade, the new acting commander of the Union Army, and Lee's quick assessment of him had some merit. 5 other commanders previously held the job before Lincoln fired them, making Meade's inexperience a potential advantage. On July 1st, Lee received word of a small skirmish in Gettysburg between a brigade of Confederate troops and dismounted Union cavalry led by Brigadier General John Buford. Recognizing the strategic importance of the hills to the south, Buford organized a delaying action until Federal reinforcements could arrive. Thinking
They had weapons of single shot, they had to reload every shot. I read somewhere that an experienced shooter could shoot several shots per minute. No matter that he has to reload every single one of them, they had the reload sets ready for them and they could reload with seconds. I think 10 seconds it took them. They were really accurate with, you have to put this pipe in the tube and clean it, push it down, tamp the gunpowder. Takes time. But if you have done it for your life and your life is in danger, the faster you do it. I mean, they did it really quickly. For me, it was a surprise how quick these guys could reload those weapons.
Thinking that the Union presence at Gettysburg was bigger than it was, Lee ordered the bulk of his army to head there. To the northwest of Gettysburg on McPherson's Ridge, Buford's cavalry bravely held their ground as best they could, but were slowly being pushed back. A small respite was given as Union General John Reynolds arrived with reinforcements. What initially started off as an accidental clash between smaller units quickly escalated into a full-scale battle, with 18,000 Federal soldiers holding off 30,000 rebels, with more on the way. Eventually, the Union line collapsed against the onslaught and pulled back through the town of Gettysburg. An intense firefight erupted in the streets, with Federal troops trying desperately to not get left behind in the chaos. So far, the first day of battle seemed to favor the Confederacy, with the Union Army abandoning Gettysburg and fleeing for the hills. All that was needed for victory was for Lee to go all in. But instead, he gave what is arguably the most controversial order in the entire battle.
Find General Ewell, tell him the Federal troops are withdrawn in confusion. It is only necessary to push those people in order to gain possession of those heights. Tell him to take that hill if practicable, the one beyond the town. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Very well.
Unfortunately,
Wait, you mean take that hill if practical? If not practical, don't take it. That was the mistake. Like, he should have pushed for the hill, right?
the Confederates, General Ewell didn't understand what Lee meant. Possession of the high ground would prove decisive to whichever side held it, but he was told to only take it if practical. And since he was new to command himself, Ewell decided that it wasn't very practical and held his men back to rest instead, giving the Union troops much needed time to dig in. Robert E. Lee's unclear order was among the first of many mistakes he would make. General Longstreet, Lee's second-in-command, could see the tactical disadvantage.
See how important is communication. A few words and you totally mistranslate the order. You understand it wrong, or this could change the outcome of the entire war. Just a single order, just a single battle, even the matter of seconds sometimes. It's so damn important even nowadays. No one actually talks about the communications guy in the war. I was one of them and I haven't seen any Hollywood movies about them. Like, no one cares about them. It's not like this action job, but it's one of the most important jobs, communications.
Everybody's sleeping except for the communications guy. We are the ones who have to fix the radios. The radios are working now. We got them fixed, but...
and sensibly pressed him to redeploy their army. The idea being that if they could flank south of the enemy and threaten Washington, then the Union Army would be forced to abandon the high ground. However, Lee was not susceptible to this suggestion.
If we move south to Washington, they have to pursue us, and then we can fight on ground of our choosing.
But the enemy is here. We did not want the fight, but the fight is here. How can I ask this army to retreat in the face of what they have done this day?
Not retreat, sir. Redeploy.
Our guns will move them off that hill, or you will push them off. But if Meade is there tomorrow, I cannot move this army away. No, sir, I will attack him.
This doubling down would cost the rebels dearly. By nightfall, General Meade had arrived, along with the full remainder of his army. His men by now had strengthened their positions, and all that was needed.
If you have the high ground, it's such an advantage. You cannot overestimate it. It's such a big advantage. It's so impossible to attack high ground. It's hard to run. Your pace is slow. You cannot shoot because you can't see anything because of the angles. And the guy higher than you, he sees everything. He can always shoot you. He can stay covered if necessary. I would not want to attack uphill. It's impossible. It's a suicide mission.
Simply to wait for their enemy to come for them. July 2nd, 1863. It is the second day of battle, and 75,000 Confederates are faced with attacking 95,000 Union troops.
What? We have almost 150,000 Americans taking part from this battle. Damn, that's a big number. Oh, I think you need three or four times as much men as the enemy if you're attacking the high grounds or if you're attacking a city, if you're sieging a city, because they have the defensive positions.
Entrenched on Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Cemetery Ridge. Their defensive lines on the high slopes resemble something of a fishhook. To drive them off it, Robert E. Lee ordered an all-out assault. Its main body would be carried out by General Longstreet, who would take his 15,000 rebels and strike at the Union left, and with a little luck, overrun this impenetrable line and sweep over the entire breadth of the fishhook. The possibility of such a success nearly came to be when Union Brigadier General Sickles disobeyed Meade's orders to stay put and took his Third Corps beyond the safety of the line to the Peach Orchard. There he hoped to make better use of his artillery, but in doing so, had dangerously exposed gaps in the fishhook. For hours, Sickles and his Third Corps defended the Peach Orchard, but they couldn't hope to hold it for long. Faced with the full brunt of the rebels' attack, Meade was forced to send troops off the high ground to plug in the gaps that Sickles had left behind. This order didn't come a moment too soon.
I'm beginning to understand more and more what it means to collapse the front. Oh, the front has collapsed, we have to turn back. Even if you have more men than the enemy, but your front has collapsed from some point, you gotta run, you gotta turn to the secondary defensive lines because they could attack you from the sides, they could attack. Don't matter how many men you have, if they have a better position, they could just sweep through your men and, you know, kill everybody, make them panic, disrupt everything. If your line to collapse, it's not about the numbers, then it's about positioning and pace and speed. So important is that your front line doesn't collapse, or if it collapses, that you can retreat orderly to the secondary defensive positions and then to the third defensive positions. And you just, if you retreat slowly, you can wear the enemy down. That's Estonian tactics against a certain country, if you know what I mean. We cannot win, but we have defensive positions and we can retreat orderly and wear them down.
The rebel line easily overwhelmed Sickles' Third Corps, sweeping over the Peach Orchard, the wheat field, and were fast approaching Cemetery Ridge. Wave upon wave of rebel troops smashed into the Union left. Both sides suffered horrific casualties. One wrong move on the Union's part could have ended the battle right there and then. The fighting was especially fierce on Little Round Top, the farthest edge of the Union left flank. If the Confederates could capture it, then their artillery would dominate the Union lines. Defending it was the 20th Maine Regiment, led by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
The Union had uniforms, right? Like this general uniform, blue, but the Confederates did not have uniforms as I see. Or did they? Like these grey ones? Federal soldiers look more like rebels, actually, than, yeah, the Union ones look more civilized.
At the top of the hill, he organized the bulk of his 385 men into a single file line. The rest he held back as reserves to plug in the gaps for the fight to come. As the rebels charged up the hill, they were met with relentless volley fire. The climb up the woodland slope was treacherous as they struggled to maintain balance amidst the hail of musket fire.
Yeah, you can't climb up and attack if you have a volley fire coming at your way. For me, it's impossible. I would never do this. I always think if I would be a general, I would use cleverness and outwittedness more than aggressiveness and just straight attack. Because this is stupid. To go straight at an enemy that is almost as big as you, too risky. I would use the mind games, you know. I'd try to outsmart my enemy.
The first rebel charge was unable to keep up the momentum and gradually pulled back. This brief respite wasn't enjoyed by the Yankees for long, as the rebels reorganized themselves for another charge, but yet again, it met the same results as the first and ended with another regrouping. Fearing being flanked for the upcoming third charge, Chamberlain pulled what remained of his reserves to form an angle to the main line. This quick thinking was spot on, as the third charge was indeed a flanking maneuver. The fight by now had become desperate, as both sides were so close.
They're so close to each other, really. I feel like they go to like 15 meters to each other or a few yards or something like that, and they just shoot, reload, shoot, till you're dead, till somebody shoots you. Such a weird way of doing war, doing battle, because at the ancient times, you go hand to hand, you fight, you know, okay, it's aggressiveness. But here, you don't really do that. Unless you have close quarter battles, close quarter combat, but they don't. They just shoot each other at 15 meters or something like that. Such a weird thing. I don't know, you see all your enemies, you see their faces, you see what they're doing. I would, I think, want to just charge in them with my sword or something like that. I couldn't just stay there and shoot. You can shoot from a distance away, but that close, I think they should go hand to hand. I think this is a good time to name all of the new patrons, and there's a lot of you because I have taken a slight pause. Why have I taken pause? Because I am engaged now. Yes, you did not know this, I am engaged. My personal life is my personal life, but I think I can tell you this, so yeah. I'm engaged. Congratulations to me and to us. I'm not gonna say who she is, just because it's not necessary, but now I'm gonna shout out the patrons. Thank you Elijah for becoming a patron. Thank you Jareth Torres for becoming a patron. Thank you Jacob Richert for becoming a patron. Thank you Christian Mongi for becoming a patron. Weird names from all over the world. These are not just Americans. They are from Italy, from Russia, from everywhere actually. Thank you Valery Cvetkov. I know how to say your name because you have a Russian name. Thank you Richard Witt. All of you guys, you have directly supported this channel. You have a very high position on my channel, a very high position. You all are amazing. Okay, let's see what happens now.
So they fired on one another at almost point-blank range. For 90 minutes, Chamberlain's men had stubbornly held the line, but the likelihood of them surviving a fourth charge didn't look good. The casualties they suffered had been heavy, and virtually all of their ammunition was gone. It was at this crucial moment that Chamberlain gave an order that would become one of the most iconic in the American Civil War.
We can't run away. If we stay here, we can't shoot. So let's fix bayonets. We'll have the advantage of moving down the hill.
As the final Confederate charge made its way up the hill, the 20th Maine Regiment lined up and fixed bayonets. Wielding his sword at the enemy, Chamberlain gave the order to charge, leading the attack personally with his men. This move caught the rebels completely by surprise, causing them to rout down the hill in a flight of panic, never to return. Fighting would continue throughout the day in other parts of the battlefield, but the Union left was successfully held.
You see, even if you have more men and more firepower, the surprisal momentum is so important. They fixed bayonets, they attacked, they didn't have any bullets anymore, and the enemy did. Still the Confederate troops ran. Panic happens quite easily in war, so yeah, just a little bit necessary and the whole thousands ran in panic. This was a genius move and a very brave one. I salute you, General, who is dead by now.
July the 3rd, 1863. By the morning of the third day, both the Union and the Confederates had suffered horrific losses, with up to 35,000 combined casualties so far. Although Robert E. Lee's attempts to take the high ground had failed miserably, he still refused to admit defeat, fervently believing that on the second day, the Union were close to breaking, and one last big push would bring victory, with an all-out assault on the Union center.
In the center.
See, all-out assault on the Union center. That goes against everything I would do if aggressive conflict happens. My way would not be to go aggressively with force to the center. My way would be to harass, to make panic in the enemy, to outsmart them, outwit them, attack small contingents at a time, run away, hit and run, all of that stuff. More of the Mongol tactics. None of that straightforward 1,000 men straight into the lines, none of that Stalingrad stuff. This costs you a lot of men and it probably costs you a victory. You cannot win like this, I don't think you can.
Sir, they will break in the center. Those people will be gaining men from all directions, guns by the thousands, and Richmond has nothing left to send us. So if we stay, we fight. If we retreat now, we will have fought here for 2 days, and will leave knowing we could not drive him off. And I have never yet left the enemy in command of the field. No, sir. Retreat is no longer an option.
Lee's decision to go for the center and Cemetery Ridge was based on the fact that the previous day's fighting had been focused on the Union left and right.
Look at these men, they are not trenched, but they are behind strong defensive rocks. You cannot shoot through those rocks. If you cannot shoot your enemy, you have to go so close that you can hit him. And if he can shoot you all the time that you run uphill so close that you can hit him, he will probably kill you. So Lee, if you're hearing this from heaven or wherever you are, it was a stupid move.
Wings. The reserves that were sent to reinforce those wings came from the center, which was now the weakest point of the line. In theory, anyway. In reality, any attack on the Union center would be suicidal.
Yes.
What Longstreet knew and protested to Lee was that such an attack would be over open ground. For 3/4 of a mile, their men would be without cover and exposed to Federal cannon fire. Those that survived would then be up against volleys of musket fire by Federal soldiers behind stone walls and earthworks. The losses of such an attack would be staggering. Longstreet tried repeatedly.
I think Lee is, disillusional. If I hear these odds right now, this is the opposite thing I would do. Most of you would understand, never go through open field. If you're open to cannon fire and volley fire, you cannot even shoot back. It's very brave, but it's very stupid.
Swayed Lee against the attack, but to no avail. All he could do was see it through. Leading the charge would be Major General George Pickett and his division of 12,000 men. To provide them with some cover, Longstreet implemented 160 cannons to fire on Cemetery Ridge in hopes to pin down the Union artillery. But privately, Longstreet knew that any such hope was forlorn. 100 Federal cannons simply returned fire. The combined strength used by both armies made this the largest ever artillery barrage in North American history. When the moments finally came for Pickett to lead the charge, Longstreet couldn't even bring himself to give the order.
Your order, sir. General Longstreet, should I commence the attack?
Emerging from the concealment of the trees, 12,000 rebels began the long march to Cemetery Ridge.
12,000 go straight out of their covers just to get executed. I don't even need to see the movie to know that this is a bad idea. A lot of thousands of men just open. If you're on the other side, if you're from the Union side, you just see thousands of men coming at you. All you have to do is reload and shoot, and they cannot even shoot back because you're covered. You're covered, behind rocks or foxholes. Reload and shoot, all you have to do. It's basically Stalingrad at its worst. Union soldiers are Germans who are, at very good defensive positions and just shooting down enemy by thousands.
The artillery barrage had worked as the Union cannons had stopped firing and Pickett's division were able to advance unmolested. But it was a ploy. Union commanders had briefly silenced their guns to lure their enemy into the killing fields. When the Confederate division walked into optimum range, the Union artillery hit them with everything they had. Solid cast iron balls bounced across the landscape, slamming into rebel lines, followed by shrapnel shells that exploded overhead, spitting thousands of metal fragments into enemy ranks. When Pickett's division were at even closer range, they were hit by devastating canister shot, small cast iron balls densely packed together that when fired resembled something of a shotgun, taking out rows of men at a time. The punishment inflicted...
I've heard about this attack. It's called Barret attack. It shoots like 1,000 musket bullets almost, like just like a shot, like 100 shotguns shoot straight, and the area of fire is not like that. It's like that. Everything that is ahead of that cannon will be minced meat. If you have dense rows of men, there would just be piles of pink flesh after that, unfortunately.
The vision was horrifying, but admirably, the survivors continued their desperate march on Cemetery Ridge unabated. As they neared Federal lines, Union soldiers were now able to use their muskets. Volley after volley hit the rebels, decimating their numbers. What was left of Pickett's men were just able to break through and reach the stone walls. Both sides engaged in desperate hand-to-hand fighting, but eventually, the greater numbers overwhelmed the Confederates. When the fighting was finally over, a mortified George Pickett had lost over 2/3 of his division.
General Pickett, sir, you must look to your division.
General Lee, I have no division.
The devastating results of Pickett's charge brought Robert E. Lee back to reality. No chance of victory could possibly be snatched from this defeat. On July 5th, 1863, Lee ordered his exhausted army to retreat south to Virginia. The chance to march on Washington was forever gone.
Damn! I can imagine the feelings of these men. They have lost, everybody has lost someone, friends, comrades, and they march back defeated. I mean, the motivation is down. Motivation is everything in army. Morale, you know, it's down. You've already lost the war, basically.
Gettysburg is another rare example of why historical accuracy in films can be possible, should be possible, or uniquely to this case, needed to be possible. The movie as we know it wouldn't exist if it had to deal with the creative liberties you often find in Hollywood movies. And what do I mean by this? Well, one cool thing the filmmakers wanted to do was shoot the movie where the battle was actually fought, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which has since become a national military park. A place that not only preserves the land on which this battle was fought, but its history and legacy. So, in order to shoot there, they needed to prove to the National Park Service that they would be respectful to the time period, since no war film had ever been shot in a national park before. Fortunately, Gettysburg was a passion project of director Ronald Maxwell, who spent 15 years trying to bring it to life, before it was picked up by media mogul Ted Turner, who was also a hardcore Civil War buff. In fact, he makes a brief cameo in the movie as a Confederate officer who gets shot during Pickett's charge. So right from the offset, the entire production crew understood and accepted the responsibility in adapting this piece of history. But aside from the National Park Service, there was one other group they needed to convince in order to make this picture into something very special. The reenactors, living historians whose passion about the American Civil War is second to none. Over 5,000 volunteers showed up to participate from every corner of the USA.
My great-grandfather fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. And I just think it's an honor for me to get the opportunity to come here and make the best picture that we can make. Maybe I can honor him and the boys who fought and died here.
I think we're really fortunate to have those people involved. In fact, they couldn't be making this picture without them. You know, I mean, there's no question about that, because these guys come with their wardrobe, they come with their weaponry, and they come with all the accoutrements, but they also come with the stuff in their head and the stuff in their heart.
He's not exaggerating, by the way, about how passionate these guys were. Most of them were not paid for their time and efforts. The only reimbursements they might have received would have been in travel expenses or for food, and yet they helped shave production costs by bringing years...
This is so wholesome. I don't know, I'm feeling... Seeing how they do things in Hollywood, this is different. This is not how Hollywood works. This is outside of the rules, actually. It's passion project. I have a lot of respect for this kind of stuff.
...experience and training, as well as their own equipment. There were even reenactors who brought their own cannons. That's how much they care about the American Civil War.
You have a cannon. We'll bring it to the set. We can see if we can use it. Everybody in America, if you have cannons, we need you for this shoot. Bring your cannons.
So, imagine what would happen if the filmmakers didn't. If they took too many extreme creative liberties, these reenactors would simply walk off the set, and the entire production would be halted. That's why Gettysburg needed to be as historically accurate as possible, and thankfully, they succeeded. They did so well, in fact, that there's hardly any inaccuracies worth mentioning in this review. So instead, I'm going to be covering how Gettysburg handled representing both sides of the war. The film's greatest strength is its heavy focus on the tactics and strategies of the battle, which is applauded by both Northerners and Southerners. But Gettysburg also tries its best to have a non-biased approach, which didn't sit well with some audience members. For example, the late film critic Gene Siskel gave Gettysburg a thumbs down in his review, calling it bloated Southern propaganda, He clearly didn't approve seeing Confederate characters talk about the cause and yet avoid the subject of slavery.
Why are you fighting this war?
Why are you fighting it?
I want to free the slaves, of course. Preserve the Union.
I don't know about some other folk, but I ain't fighting for no darkies one way or the other. I'm fighting for my rats. All of us here, that's what we're fighting for.
For your what?
For our rats.
Now, I think we can all agree that every Confederate soldier believed their reasons for fighting was righteous, so it makes sense for the film to show them rationalizing these beliefs in the way that they do. And how do they go about this? By using a Brit, of course. He's the one with the cup of tea, in case you didn't notice. The character in question was the real-life historical figure Sir Arthur Lyon Fremantle. In the movie, he's a British officer sent on behalf of the Crown to observe the Confederate Army.
Colonel Fremantle?
Sir?
Allow me to introduce Major General George Pickett. General Pickett, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Fremantle of Her Majesty's venerable and elite Coldstream Guards, Britain's military attaché to the Confederacy.
I mean, it's not that long ago that they fought themselves free under the British, from the British, and now the British are just observing what their, children are doing. Basically, the Union and Confederacy kind of came out of the British colonies, and now the British are just sending, watch what they're doing, let's see how they get along.
And, you might say, the eyes and ears of Queen Victoria?
Oh, hardly, sir. Merely an observer. And your humble guest.
Whilst those credentials were real, his reasons for being there was not. In reality, Fremantle was not Britain's official military attaché, but more of a tourist. After hearing about the American Civil War, he wanted to see it for himself, but specifically, the Southern perspective. Taking a leave of absence, Fremantle traveled to the Confederate States of America. Slipping past the Union blockade, he landed in Mexico and crossed the border into Texas.
What the hell? This is so weird. Oh, they're having a war. I want to see it. I'm gonna, quit my job and just go and see war and yay!
Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Virginia, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now, you may be wondering, how was he able to get about so easily and given all this access? Well, a lot of Confederate officials just assumed he was a British observer, and Fremantle just didn't bother correcting them. The company he kept also gave this appearance as he traveled with other European officers who were official observers. So anyway, why am I mentioning this guy? Because aside from being a real historical figure, Fremantle's perspective as an outsider allows us to learn about the Confederates through his eyes.
I guess we Southerners and you English have at least one thing in common. We'd rather lose the war than admit to the mistake.
Well, let me make this very plain to you, sir. We do not consent, and we will never consent. And what you've got to do is you've got to go back over there to your parliament, and you've got to make it very plain to them. You've got to tell them that what we're fighting for here is a freedom from what we consider to be the rule of a foreign power. Virginia would not allow itself to be ruled by some king over there in London, and it's not about to let itself be ruled by some president in Washington.
The reason why this may all appear as Southern propaganda, as Gene Siskel believed, is because we are seeing the Confederate side of the story, and they're the ones telling it. If that's all we got as an audience, then I would agree with Siskel. But we also get a Union perspective to help balance things.
Nowadays, Hollywood movies are one-sided. You have a hero, you have anti-protagonist, you have a protagonist. This does not happen. It's 90s or 80s in the Hollywood when they could make things like that. Nowadays, it's much more about money. With this size, projects almost never happen.
Out. Unlike their southern counterparts, slavery is at the forefront of the discussion and a big reason why they fight. Speaking on the Union's behalf is Colonel Lawrence Chamberlain, an educated college professor before the war who strongly opposed slavery. Through epic speeches or in private conversations, he is the idealist who advocates the Northern cause. The only criticism I have is that bit where Chamberlain comes across a runaway slave. When I first saw this scene, I thought it might briefly offer a new perspective from the slave's point of view, but the opportunity isn't taken. Chamberlain instead looks at the man with pity, and he never says a word, which begs the question why even bother putting it in the movie in the first place. But aside from that, I think the Union side was handled very well. To present both sides equally resulted in a much deeper movie that helped resonate with Northern and Southern audiences alike. It would have been easy for the filmmakers to push through a contemporary agenda and change things, but instead, they trusted the history they were trying to tell. But overall, Gettysburg's main focus is the battle itself, and it goes above and beyond to recreate it as accurately as possible. Few films are made with such competence and a love for history, and this one is able to rub shoulders with the greatest of epics. Films like Tora Tora Tora, A Bridge Too Far, and Waterloo. Gettysburg is a part of that collective that all history buffs hold dear.
So cool, I love it, I love it. That's what I was expecting from it. Thank you William P. Esping for suggesting it. Without you, I wouldn't been able to watch it. Amazing. Now you guys can suggest videos for me. If you go to Patreon, you become a patron, you send me a message, I will watch that message, I will react to it because you're a patron. I will take your opinion into consideration much more because you support the channel. But this video is long enough. My friends, go and get the cup. A few people have gotten it. I don't have time to mention them. I will mention them in the next video. Go and get it. It's amazing. And as always, my friends, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.